Boo! Did I scare you? Probably not. But you know what is scary? Having to watch 11 Hellraiser movies for a stupid Halloween-themed video for my YouTube channel. But that's just stupid. There's no way I'd ever be dumb enough to do that. Oh, wait a minute. That's what I'm doing now. Guess I'm the idiot, huh? Whatever. Happy Halloween! Okay, fun's over. Here's me ranting about 11 Hellraiser movies, I guess. Here's why the Hellraiser franchise shouldn't have been a franchise to begin with. Hellraiser the First is not bad. I mean, personally, it's not the cinematic classic horror masterpiece that a lot of people like to claim that it is, but I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as some critics think it is either. Take, for example, Roger Ebert, who famously called Hellraiser, quote, bankruptcy of imagination, and gave it a rare 0.5 stars. Jesus Christ, Roger, relax. Who hurt you, man? This movie does not need all this vitriolic hate from you. Save it for the sequels. Now those are shit that truly deserve all this negative hate. Bash the shit out of those movies. Those are the ones that deserve to be called bankruptcy of imagination and 0.5 stars. Send them down to the fiery pit of hell and damn them to all damnation. Drive a spear through all those stupid-ass Hellraiser movies until they're all dead and chop them up until their bodies can't... What was I talking about? Oh, yeah, the first one, before this entire franchise went to shit. Yeah, it's decent. So for those of you unfamiliar with the story of the first Hellraiser, basically the premise is that there's this Italian greaser who gets kidnapped and tortured by his local BDSM artists after solving his local Rubik's Cube, but he somehow escapes from them and is found by this British lady who used to pork him despite being married to his brother, who by the way is just blissfully unaware of all this shit. So to regain his human form or whatever, the British lady pulls in under the skin and lures men into their deaths for the Italian greaser to suck them dry, until they're eventually found out by the final girl slash scream queen of this movie franchise, Kirsty, who uses the Rubik's Cube to summon the BDSM artist to torture the Italian greaser and cast them away. Now, as far as final girl slash scream queen goes, from total dumbass to actual competent survivor, Kirsty is somewhere in the middle. She is smart enough that she can solve the Rubik's Cube and is self-aware enough to realize that the Tesseract is the only thing that can beat her creepy uncle, but make the BDSM artist disappear. However, despite that, she's also a fucking moron. It takes her literally 10 minutes to figure out that this guy is not her dad, but just her creepy uncle under her dad's face. Despite him not acting anything like his dad, she literally leaves her hiding spot just because creepy uncle guy leaves the room, and she starts crying and making noise instead of, I don't know, getting the fuck out of that house and calling the police, making her an easy target for Italian greaser guy to find her and hold a knife against her. I mean, what the fuck are you doing? Get the hell out of there. Stop crying, you goddamn idiot. Call for help. Call the police, or at least call your boyfriend to kick this guy's ass. What are you, stupid? Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just talk about the actual movie, because while there are a lot of impressive qualities about Hellraiser, there's also a lot of shitty qualities about the film as well. Now, on a technical level, especially in terms of stuff like practical and special effects, stop-motion animation, and costume design, there's a lot to really admire about this movie. Without a doubt, my favorite moment in the entire film was when Kirsty's dad's blood drops on the floor, and using that blood, remnants of Frank's body starts to reshape themselves. His brain starts to form, his hands and torso start building themselves back together. It was all a really cool use of stop-motion animation and just really gross-looking costume design that helped build a sense of fear and dread. It felt very much like a Cronenberg or Carpenter film in terms of its body horror, because when you first see Frank as this gross little goblin man, it sort of gets you. But what I found really interesting about his character design, as the more incels he sucks dry, the more he becomes human-like, developing stuff like muscle tissue and eventually actual human skin. But you can tell that it's not fitting him organically, almost like he's wearing those stupid-ass Scooby-Doo masks from Mission Impossible. It was all really cool to look at. Not all the special effects hold up, though. Obviously, these lightning effects are pretty dated, but there were some creature effects that didn't look great also, if I'm being honest. The obvious culprits being this weird erectile dysfunction monster thing and this flying skeleton creature that burst from skinny Hagrid, but whatever. Overall, most of the special effects hold up decently well, and on top of that, I think the designs of the actual BDSM artists, or Cenobites, as the lore nerds will probably keep screaming at me in the comments if I don't actually call them by their real names at least once, are pretty cool to look at. Each BDSM artist had their own designs and unique look to them, the most iconic of which being Pinhead, and while his look is definitely the most memorable thing about this franchise, I can't forget about the other beings because they had equally cool looking designs. In fact, I was so inspired by their designs that I decided to give each of these Cenobites an, quote, unofficial name, especially since most of these beautiful bastards don't have official names anyway. For example, Pinhead is Pinhead, obviously, this one I call Mouth Herpes, this one I call Choking Hazard, and this one I call Nikocado Avocado Chat Edition. Anyway, continuing on, on Pinhead and his posse, I think my favorite scene in the entire movie was their introduction. When Kirsty solves the puzzle box and she notices a bunch of weird shit like the IV bag turning into blood before exploding, the TV changing channels before the mouth guy sticks his grubby fingers into Kirsty's mouth, which leads to the rest of these goons being introduced, it really creates this sense of dread and terror. Everything from the music to the special effects involving bursts of wind to Pinhead's actual voice, saying scary, badass things like this.
Oh, no tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.
This is without a doubt the best scene in the entire film because I think this particular moment captures everything that this film has set up and explores. Weird sex shit mixed with freaks and weirdos. Unfortunately, the rest of the film doesn't really match this level of quality filmmaking or horror now that I think about it. Sure, there were some other cool shots like Frank reanimating himself to a fucking golem man with like muscles and flesh, but these moments were far and few between in a story that I honestly really did not give the slightest shit about. There's this weird angle that the film tries to ram in about sexual lust and passion, specifically seen in the character of British lady who hates her marriage so much and loves creepy uncle guy so much that she's willing to fucking knock the shit out of people with a hammer for the sake of getting another piece of that Italian stallion D. I don't know, personally, I don't really give a shit about this aspect of the story. I mean, it's decently well written to the point that if this is a story that you care about, then I totally get it, so I'm not going to take away points for that. But honestly, the more interesting points of the story that the film just kind of glosses over is the fact that Frank somehow escaped these weird, kinky BDSM artists. Like, this shit is really fucking interesting, and I wish the film would explore this aspect of its story, and yet the film just glosses over that for some more hot and steamy love sessions between this guy and British lady. Like, you can't just throw me chopped up pieces of Frank's face and just move on like it's nothing. I want to see more of that shit. But even if I was interested in this human story with all these people, it's hard for me to really get invested when a lot of the acting is kind of bad. Like, not all the acting is terrible, as I think the actress who plays Kirsty without a doubt gave the best performance in the entire film, especially during the more horrific scenes where she had to express genuine fear and terror. I mean, sure, it's easy for a random white lady to scream when spooky shit happens, but the fear that's placed on her face, the way she reacts to certain scenes, she's given a genuinely great performance, so I can't discount how good she is in the movie. And obviously, I can't forget about Doug Bradley as Pinhead, as his performance is iconic too. But the rest of the actors are kind of bad. Like, some of the performances were so laughably awful that I legitimately burst out laughing, especially anything that came out of Frank or the dad's mouth, as their dialogue was just fucking priceless. Like, when these characters just said stupid shit like this.
Kirsty, it's Frank. It's Uncle Frank.
No.
You remember?
No.
Come to Daddy.
I can't help but laugh. They look and act like they're in a porno or a Neil Breen movie or something. It's amazing. I fucking love it. And the British lady was also hilariously cringe as well, like the way she would move around and say things, especially in the bathroom after killing people for her half-dead lover, was just so fucking bizarre. Like, what the hell are you doing, ma'am? Anyway, I could go on, but I'd just be nitpicking / teasing this movie's existence, and I have like 10 more of these dumbass films to talk about. It's Hellraiser. You already know it's a classic, and everyone loves it. You don't need me to confirm that it's good. While this film is not really for me, I totally get why people love this, and it's fondly remembered. So let's move on already. I've got other things I need to do today, so I'm going to give the original Hellraiser a 6 out of 10, closer to a 5 than a 7. Hellraiser 2 is just, kind of bad. I don't know, if I'm gonna be honest with you guys, even though I didn't really enjoy this film, I don't really feel that strongly about my dislike towards this film, at least in comparison to the other dumpster fires, but we'll get to those later. But with this one, though, I just don't care one way or another. Like, yeah, it's not a great movie, but it's not offensively bad either. In a way, both the original Hellraiser and this sequel is very similar to how I feel about It and It Chapter 2. Like with Hellraiser, while I didn't think It was like an amazing movie or anything, it was a solid 6 out of 10 film that had a lot going for it that I thought made it better than the average horror movie. And with It Chapter 2, while it was certainly a much worse movie than the first, I didn't absolutely hate it in a way that left me upset or angry, and that's exactly how I feel about Hellraiser 2. A stupid yet inoffensive sequel that I don't feel strongly about. But unlike It Chapter 2, where they just do the same shit as the first one, only instead of beating up a clown they make fun of for being a stupid weeb, Hellraiser 2, I mean, it still does the same shit over and over again, but it also attempts to expand upon the lore that is established in the first film, and honestly, the things they chose to add in this universe is very hit or miss, as there were some ideas that I thought were kind of interesting, while others felt super stupid. One of these stupid ideas is shoved into your face right at the beginning of the movie by giving Pinhead a backstory, showcasing that before he became the titular arch-nemesis of Dirty Dan, he was a British officer who was just somehow randomly came across the puzzle box who eventually got a bunch of nails stuck to his head and bleached his skin after opening it. Now, I might be in the minority here, but I don't really like the idea of giving Pinhead a backstory backstory, not just because it doesn't really add anything to his character or the film in general, but it also takes away what I liked about him in the first place. You see, part of what makes slasher villains like Freddy Krueger or Michael Myers so interesting is that they are just pure embodiment of evil that don't have much going for them other than some crazy bloodlust. They're not tragic characters who feel conflict about their actions like Darth Vader or some stupid bullshit like that. They are just crazy bad guys who go around killing people, and that sense of threat from these villains makes the hero's struggles in their respective movies that much more engaging and gripping. But when you give your slasher villain, your pure embodiment of evil, a backstory, you're essentially just stripping away of what made them so interesting in the first place. Take Michael Myers in Halloween 2 in the Rob Zombie remake, for example. By giving him all these unnecessary bullshit backstories like making him Laurie Strode's brother or that he came from an abusive white trash family or some shit, you're giving unnecessary detail to a character that does nothing but make him less interesting and cool, and that's exactly what this film is doing to Pinhead. Now, Pinhead isn't an important character to me like Freddy or Michael, so I'm not like losing sleep or anything for giving him a backstory, but part of what I loved about Pinhead and the rest of the Cenobites in general is the fact that in the first Hellraiser, the film doesn't really give you an explanation as to who these weird BDSM fuckers are. The most they do to explain is that they're extra-dimensional beings that really love freaky deaky shit, and that's all the backstory you really need. What makes them terrifying is that, like Kirsty from the first film, you have no clue who these assholes are, but based on what had happened to Frank from the first film, you know that these are some sick fucks that are capable of some tremendous horror, so it's not really interesting or exciting when it's revealed that Pinhead, Choking Hazard, Mouth Herpes, and Nikocado Avocado, who were described as, quote, angels to some, devils to others in the first film, are just poor dipshits that got stuck with a shitty pyramid scheme of torture porn after opening the Rubik's Cube. It takes away that sense of mystery and disturbance that the first film had. That being said, though, one thing that I did like about the film is the introduction of this film's antagonist, the evil therapist Dr. Man. Not the guy himself, he's just basically the most stereotypical mustache-twirling villain you can think of, but more in terms of what becomes of him and what the film chooses to do with him. Basically, in this movie, they introduce this being called the Leviathan, which is essentially this universe's version of God, only instead of a chill dude with a cloak and white beard, he's this fucking Yu-Gi-Oh-ass pyramid of light-ass configuration that runs Oz and creates sex deviants. Anyway, what this has to do with anything is that when he enters this hellish universe where the Cenobites were created, he gets offered up by the British lady from the first film, who, by the way, I should have mentioned before this, is resurrected and essentially just Frank from Hellraiser 1 in this movie, and essentially endures the same fate that Pinhead went through when he was still a British officer man. He gets a skin job, has barbed wires laced around his face, and has one of those penis worms from Peter Jackson's King Kong stuck to his head. I mean, plastic surgery fuck-ups wise, he looks better than Mickey Rourke. But yeah, beyond those two specific things I wanted to mention, I honestly don't have much else to say about Hellraiser 2 because there's really not much else to say in general. I mean, the actress who plays Kirsty still gives a good performance just like she did in the first film, except in this one she has even less to work with. The acting still sucks, the directing and presentation are very bland and whatever, the writing is just It's just a very bland horror sequel where, like other horror sequels, they just kind of do the same shit with a slightly different coat of paint. They bring back the British lady from the first film to essentially just be Frank's replacement by doing all the same shit that he did, like sucking victims dry, wearing clothes on top of muscles and tendons, the skinless freak seducing the skinful freak. The Cenobites show up to put these fuckers in their place. Like I said, it's just more of the same shit over and over and over again. I will say this though, I did think it was super weird that after sucking so many people dry that the British lady was just magically able to get her own skin back, which, if you think about it, doesn't really make any sense because in the first Hellraiser, Frank couldn't grow back his own skin, he literally just stole the skin from his brother and used that as his skin because that was the only way he couldn't be a fucking skinless freak anymore. So why the hell does British lady get her own skin back? Doesn't this break your own rules? The rules that you set up in only a movie before this? I don't know, what do I know? I don't give a shit, I just want to move on. There's literally not much else to say, it's just a bland and unmemorable sequel that I'm gonna forget about, and I'm gonna give Hellraiser 2 a 4 out of 10. The Last Temptation of Pinhead Christ, I mean Hellraiser 3, was fucking awful, but hilarious, and hey, compared to the rest of the pile of horseshit that I had to sit through, that's honestly the best kind of Hellraiser sequel I can ask for, but again, I'll get there. The movie is a piece of shit, let's just get this out of the way. I'm probably not causing any major controversies for stating that Hellraiser 3 sucks massive elephant penis, but unlike Hellraiser 2, where it was just pretty much a nothing, worthless experience that immediately left my head an hour after I saw it, the movie was just absolutely absolutely fucking hilarious. Once again, as it seems to be tradition in the Hellraiser franchise, the acting is atrocious, but somehow the bad acting in this one was so bad that it transcended from being just bad acting to hilariously shitty acting. Like, I'm talking like porn level, The Room level acting. Like, take this scene for example.
Tomorrow, I'll give one to somebody else. Now get dressed and get out of here.
You shit. Who do you think you are?
I'm J.P. Monroe, right? You stupid little bitch. Give me back my shirt and get the fuck out of my life!
I can't fucking believe you. You bastard! You get me in here!
Like, yeah, like you were at fucking gunpoint. You stupid.
Look, you think you're some goddamn prince or something? With your shitty little kingdom out there and all this ugly shit!
Fucking Oscar-worthy performance right here. And speaking of porn, a lot of this movie just looks and feels like a porno, not just in terms of the shitty acting, but just how certain scenes are set. Like, even scenes where nothing even remotely sexual is happening, the way some scenes set up character interactions feels like I'm watching a bullshit dialogue scene before the fucking happens in a porno. It's hilarious. But anyway, enough about porn, because the movie certainly has a lot to offer in terms of things I can make fun of, and man, there's a lot to make fun of. So rather than continuing Kirsty's story from the first two films and create a trilogy of movies surrounding her, we instead follow a new heroine, journalism woman, a character so lacking in, well, character that the movie has to blatantly tell me multiple times that she is in fact the main character and that she is the central focus of this story. Whether it be through the multiple Vietnam War dream sequences that she has about her dad dying in Vietnam or some stupid bullshit like that, it doesn't really add anything to her character or the plot, so it doesn't matter. Or Pinhead's British counterpart pulling a Jedi mind trick to visit her in her dreams to tell her to kick Pinhead's ass. The movie just throws a bunch of shit at me to make me care about this character, but as a wise man once said, frankly, my dear, I don't give a single flying fuck. Anyway, the point is that I didn't care about this journalism woman, and neither should you, because the movie also doesn't give a shit about properly developing her, so frankly it's just a waste of time, effort, and brain power. But what isn't a waste is pretty much everything else about the movie, because the movie is fucking wild, especially the last like 20 minutes of the movie, because within the span of 20 minutes, we see Pinhead massacre an entire bar of patrons, Pinhead's new posse of Cenobites chasing after journalism woman in the street, explosions every fucking second that she runs through the street, making this look and feel like I'm watching Hellraiser directed by Michael Bay. But that's nothing compared to this scene where Pinhead attends Sunday service, quotes the Bible in front of a churchgoer while melting the cross, and then does his best impression of Jesus from Passion of the Christ. It's fucking hilarious. Like, if this isn't cinema, I don't know what is. Plus, in this one, we're introduced to a whole new cast of Cenobites featuring some old players like Choking Hazard, also some new ones, but rather than showcasing how cool or threatening they can be like in the first Hellraiser, they just kind of stand around and look cool, and occasionally blow shit up, I guess. Anyway, none of that matters, because what does matter is that the whole reason this movie exists is because Pinhead is having an existential crisis, in the sense that both his good side and his bad side are at odds with each other, trying to fight each other for the spotlight, aka control of their body. So basically, this character is just Itadori from Jujutsu Kaisen and James McAvoy from Split mashed together into one character, so that's all fun. And while this could have been a somewhat interesting subplot, again, it just doesn't add anything to the overall plot or Pinhead's character. It's just another unnecessary bullshit conflict they threw in to add stakes, and it is only convenient to the overall story when the script needs it to be, such as the ending where just before Pinhead is about to conduct plastic surgery on journalism woman, this bullshit happens where British man and Pinhead fight each other for their body. I mean, I would like this in concept, but the execution is just so fucking stupid. Like, look at the faces they're making, it's hilarious. Anyway, doesn't matter. Once Pinhead and British man pull a fusion dance from Dragon Ball Z, journalism woman picks up the Rubik's Cube, stabs Pinhead in the heart, and bada boom bada bing, Halloween trick or treat, Pinhead is defeated and sent right back to hell, and the box returns journalism woman back to Earth, indicating that Pinhead's humanity has finally been restored and that peace will finally persist in this world. Except when it doesn't, when Pinhead inexplicably comes back for like 100 more fucking sequels. Anyway, that's all you really need to know about this movie, because it's fucking worthless. That can be a fun time to just laugh and make fun of, though I do advise you drink a lot of alcohol to consume this movie, because it's not nearly as fun without it. Anyway, I'm gonna give this a 3 out of 10 and move on. So I'm going to be honest with you guys, I was originally going to dedicate an entire 5 to 10 minute section to each subsequent Hellraiser sequel after the third one, and I was going to commit to it, as last night I was in the middle of writing an entire section of Hellraiser 4, but honestly, I just couldn't fucking do it, considering that this video is already way the fuck too long, and I do not want to have to talk about these sequels any longer than I physically need to. I am just going to speed run through the sequels and provide my super brief thoughts from my notes when discussing these shitty movies, because honestly, these movies don't deserve any of the dedicated section that I gave to the first 3 films. I mean, they barely deserve them in general, but these are just bottom of the barrel, barely movies. These are corporate abominations that studios sharded out to ensure they remain in charge of the Hellraiser franchise and to squeeze more money out of your gullible wallets. They are the bare minimum, absolute dogshit, fundamentally broken, absolutely insufferable, unbearably torturous, low-bar dumpster trash that barely count as movies. And if the filmmakers, quote-unquote, gave this little of a shit about making these movies, then I'm going to put an equal amount of effort into talking about them. Anyway, that's all I need to say straight up, so give me a minute to take a breath and stretch my legs. Okay, I'm ready. And go. Okay, Pinhead X, I mean Hellraiser Bloodline, is a fucking scam of a movie. It is marketed as a Hellraiser movie in space, and I didn't even get that. It was like 10% in space, 30% in olden times, and 60% in fucking 90s New York. This would have been a hilarious piece of shit to make fun of by having it take place in space like Alien or some shit, but instead they just end up doing the same shit that previous Hellraiser films have done, making this one of the most boring Hellraiser sequels that I had to sit through. Ben from Parks and Rec is randomly in this movie, and even though he's supposed to be a Frenchman from the 1700s, he sounds and acts more like Trevor from The Good Place than what an actual Frenchman back then would have sounded like, but whatever. He was pure cringe to watch. They introduced this new character named Angelique, who's like a princess from the Cenobites' homeworld, so she kind of outranks Pinhead, but she lets Pinhead boss her around, and she's actually a demon but looks like a human except when she isn't, so she's both a demon and a Cenobite. I don't know, nothing makes any fucking sense in this entire movie. They also introduce a new subplot revolving around the toy maker, who is the creator of the box, and while in premise a concept like this would be interesting, they just do absolutely jack shit with this concept, and it's just an excuse for Pinhead to run around, chase after, and attempt to kill a new dumb fucker, so whatever. The only things I liked about this movie were 3 things: a robot exploding, Pinhead turning the Paul brothers into Siamese twins, and some kills. Other than that, this movie is an absolute scam, and the spaceship turning into a box that kills Pinhead, which, by the way, makes this like the 3rd fucking time that Pinhead gets killed, but whatever. Should have been a more central focus. 2 out of 10. Hellraiser Inferno is the directorial debut of Scott Derrickson, believe it or not, the same director behind some overrated generic horror movies like Sinister, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, and The Black Phone, and no wonder this is the movie Derrickson started out with, because wow, is this movie a piece of shit. This film is the spiral from the Book of Saw of Hellraiser movies, in that the movie strips away everything that makes it a Hellraiser film in the first place in favor of making a stupid, boring, generic bullshit cop movie about morality and corruption and good versus evil or fucking whatever pretentious theme this movie thinks it was attempting to explore. This movie tries so hard to be some ambitious, thought-provoking film about all the themes I mentioned, but it doesn't accomplish or successfully dissect any of this shit. This film feels less like a Hellraiser movie and even a professionally made movie, and more like a stupid fan fiction made by either edgy teenagers or pretentious film students, or both, who were forced to make a Hellraiser movie. It was just absolute horseshit. Once again, a lot of the acting is fucking awful. The actual look of this movie is ugly to look at, as it has a lot of these blue and dark grayish color schemes that make it look like I'm watching a shitty Zack Snyder movie. Pinhead is basically not in this movie, and he only shows up to prank the main cop character and talk shit about how he became an asshole or something. This movie was just so exhausting and infuriating to sit through, and by the time I finished it, I literally forgot most of what I watched. 1 out of 10. Waste of fucking time and space. I mean, Hellraiser Hellseeker was a waste of fucking time and space. Out of all of the Hellraiser sequels I watched, this was easily the most boring Hellraiser movie I had to watch. Not just because literally nothing happens in this entire movie, but it's also so fucking repetitive. Throughout this entire film, they just repeat the same 4 fucking things. The Vulture from Brooklyn Nine-Nine is living his life, he fucks a random bimbo that locks eyes with him, some spooky shit gets them killed, and then the Vulture realizes that all that shit that happened to him was just a scary dream. It's just that, over and over and over and over again. It was so fucking excruciating to watch. Literally nothing happens in this entire movie, and yet there is still an hour and a half of movie that exists. This film has this fucking green color look to it that it looks like it's a fucking Matrix movie or some shit. It was just really stupid to look at. The Vulture from Brooklyn Nine-Nine is bad at acting in this movie, and I have no idea why anyone decided to cast him in this film in the first place. They decided to bring back Kirsty from the first two Hellraiser movies for absolutely no fucking reason whatsoever, as she not only has barely anything to do in this movie, but she literally is just absent from this entire runtime. The only reason she is even in the movie is to reveal that the Vulture from Brooklyn Nine-Nine was like sacrificed to Pinhead and his posse or some shit after Kirsty found out that the Vulture was cheating on her with like 3 different women or something like that, and so she shoots the Vulture with a gun while they're driving and then fakes the car crash to make it look like an accident, sending the Vulture straight to hell. If this sounds stupid and doesn't make any sense, then welcome to my world, because I was struggling to understand how any of this shit made sense. Anyway, this movie sucks, it's repetitive, it's boring, it's torture, don't watch it, 1 out of 10. Spotlight, Hellraiser Deader is the most forgettable Hellraiser sequel that I saw for this video. Now, I'm gonna keep this one short because I straight up don't have much to say about this piece of shit, because an hour after I saw the movie, I literally forgot most of what I saw, and I wasn't willing to suffer through this shit again, so with the best of my memory, here we go. Okay, so out of all the Hellraiser sequels, this looks and feels like the cheapest one in terms of its presentation and cinematography, because the way this film is shot feels less like a professionally made Hellraiser movie and more like a combination of an episode of CSI and a porno. All of the acting also helped make the movie feel like both an episode of CSI and a porno, because a lot of it ranged from super generic and whatever to fucking awful. The premise of this movie is that there's a Charles Manson cult that like worships Pinhead or something, who, by the way, like in the last one, is barely in the movie and just uses his powers to resurrect people after killing them or some shit. So this journalism woman, who is not the journalism woman from the third Hellraiser movie, has to investigate this bullshit, and throughout her journey she gets flashbacks about her dad abused her or something like that in this weird train sex orgy dungeon. Anyway, doesn't matter. Once again, bada boom bada bing, Peter Pan, Larry King, the journalism woman meets Pinhead, who pranks her for having an abusive childhood. Ha, what a good prank. A good one, Pinhead. 1 out of 10. Gamers, Ready Player One, Hellraiser Hellworld is my least favorite Hellraiser movie by far, because this is not just a massive piece of horseshit, it's a massive piece of horseshit that pisses off every bone and molecule in my fucking body, because it thinks it's the smartest shit ever. This is basically the meta gamer Hellraiser in that you have fucking characters that specifically reference shit from the first Hellraiser, name Pinhead by name, and talk about how the rules of the Hellraiser universe are transported into the Hellraiser video game world called Hellworld or some shit. I don't know. It was dumb as fuck. This entire movie is dumb as fuck. It's so fucking obnoxious. Like, the movie thinks it's like an M. Night joint or some shit, where it's constantly like, man, what the hell is happening? You don't know what's real and what isn't. What's going on? And then to just throw that shitty twist ending that everything that happens was all just in the character's mind because Lance Henriksen drugged them or some shit to get revenge on them because they had something to do with his son's death. I'm sorry, what the fuck? What does any of this mean? It makes zero sense. Also, Henry Cavill's just in this movie for some reason, and the most significant thing that he does is fuck a woman in the hallway, get blue-balled, and then get stabbed with a hook. It's a better fate than Superman had in BVS. Anyway, what's so fucked about this movie is that it feels less like a Hellraiser film and more like a Saw movie, not just in terms of the actual pranking and bullshittery that happens in the movie, but the actual filmmaking that went into this movie, like the setups and the payoffs, the editing, the certain shots that were emphasized. It's very similar to a Saw movie. It's crazy. I wish I was watching a Saw sequel instead of this shit. Also, the music in this movie sucked. It sounded like some shit Nickelback would have played. Honestly, I can emphasize just how much this movie sticks its own head up its own ass, like it thinks it's the coolest shit ever, with the whole what's real, what isn't. It's like some Satoshi Kon film or some shit, but it just comes off so fucking stupid and obnoxious. And then, when the twist happens with Lance Henriksen, I was just so done with the movie. I'm glad Pinhead kicked down his door and beat the shit out of him. That was literally the only good scene in this stupid excuse of a movie. 1 out of 10. Hellraiser Revelations is the funniest Hellraiser movie since Hellraiser 3, despite the fact that you you could argue that this is easily the least competently made movie of the entire franchise. Apparently this movie had a budget of only like $300,000 or something like that, and you can tell from everything. The lack of locations in the movie, the fact that most of these actors are either first-timers who have never been in anything or alumni of the asylum. They chose to go about the costume and makeup in the laziest, cheapest way possible. The fact that all Pinhead does in this movie is just talk shit about the families and nothing else. The fact that this is the first film where Doug Bradley decided to say, yeah, nah, I'm skipping this one later, bitches. How the opening scene is shot in found footage like it's the Blair Witch Project or some shit like that. How the actual cinematography looks like it was shot on a camcorder. How literally nothing fucking happens in this entire movie except the kid shooting his dad with a shotgun. This is the stupidest, cheapest, most dog shit Hellraiser, and it's honestly one of the better sequels because of how funny it is. Basically, the premise of this movie is that these two 4chan users decide to run away to Tijuana, bro, because their parents were having sex with each other or some shit, but then one of them fucks a hooker, which causes them to go into this downward spiral of finding the box, and one of the white kids having to go through the same shit that Frank and British Lady did in Hellraiser 1 and 2, and meanwhile, the families just stand around in a living room talking about how nothing makes any fucking sense in the movie. It's hilarious. There's really not much else I can say. Like, it's not like with the other Hellraiser films where I can just show you the bad shit and explain why it's bad. This entire movie is a train wreck, but it's a train wreck that needs to be seen to be believed. Hellraiser Revelations is a transcendent experience that you can only get by actually sitting down and watching this masterpiece unfold. It's hilarious. If you plan on watching any of these shitty sequels, which I hope you don't, then please just watch this one, because this is the one I had the most fun with out of any of the Hellraiser sequels. Technically, this film is a 2 out of 10, but in my heart, it's a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. And finally, we have Hellraiser Judgment, a film that, like Hellraiser Deader, was so boring and forgettable that I immediately forgot most of this movie, and I don't want to see this shit again to refresh myself, so I'm just going off pure memory on this one as well. So basically, this movie is just Hellraiser Inferno and Hellraiser Hellseeker mashed into one super mega ultra Hellraiser movie. It is yet another fucking bullshit generic cop detective story about corrupt cops trying to find shit about Pinhead while also exploring these themes about corruption and morality or fucking whatever. But it's also like Hellseeker in that it is a repetitive, boring-ass movie where literally jack shit is happening, and the biggest struggle in the entire movie is trying to stay awake the entire time. But what separates this film compared to the others is that this movie weirdly decides to rip off every single horror franchise ever. It rips off Saw, Nightmare on Elm Street, Hostel, most Eli Roth movies in general, fucking you name it. They ripped off all of them. All of them except, I don't know, Hellraiser, the franchise that you're making another entry into? Like, take the opening of this movie. In the beginning of this film, we are introduced to some weird Saw trial where this creepy typer guy, like, types down all the bad shit this pedophile did, and then we turn to this fat bastard eating a piece of paper and then vomiting that shit into a tube where these hot deformed girls smear the barf all over themselves to determine the verdict of the pedophile, and Pinhead is just in a room listening to all this shit. Like, what the fuck is all this crap? Like, I thought I was watching a Hellraiser movie, not a Saw ripoff. And what's worse is that this literally has nothing to do with the main story of corrupt detective man solving cases and doing corrupt shit. They might as well have been two separate movies. Also, Pinhead is once again played by a different actor, and once again, like the last one, he's giving a really shitty performance. The whole look of this movie is just so ugly to look at. Like, it uses a bunch of brown pastels and colors throughout the movie. It looks like I'm watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre or some shit. It was stupid. Anyway, while there's plenty to talk about with this film, I have already given this movie way more time than it deserves, and I want to finally talk about a good movie again, so I'm giving this a 1 out of 10 and moving on. Finally, after suffering through an onslaught of shitty Hellraiser sequel after shitty Hellraiser sequel, after going through the mental equivalent of that one scene in Shawshank where Andy Dufresne went through a football field long pipe filled with shit, I finally get to bask in the rain by rewarding myself with this new reboot/remake, Hellraiser, directed by David Bruckner. Now, for those of you who don't know, Bruckner is the same director responsible for films like The Ritual and The Night House, so when I heard that he would be directing a new Hellraiser film, I got excited, and is what inspired me to make this video in the first place. Anyway, after seeing this film, I can safely say that this is not only easily the best film in the Hellraiser franchise, but also one of the best horror films of 2022 so far. Now, personally, I'm not sure if me saying this is due to the fact that it's actually that good, or if it's because my standards for Hellraiser movies are just so fucking low to the point that if anything has even a tiny morsel of quality, that I'll automatically think it's fucking Citizen Kane. Who knows? But what's important is that I think this new Hellraiser film is great. Now, taking aside the fact that this movie is a million times better better than any of the Hellraiser sequels in every way, from the directing to the cinematography to the writing to the acting to the editing to the music to the special effects and pretty much every other aspect of filmmaking. What I love about this latest film is just how much effort, love, and passion was put into making this movie as good as it is. For starters, the actual look of this film is fucking awesome to behold. This is easily one of the best looking films I've seen this year alone, not just in the franchise. The way that certain scenes transition from areas of safety to horrific gore, the actual kill sequences involving the Cenobites, the way the camera holds long enough to showcase just how terrifying these monsters are without needing to quick cut or pan away, it's gorgeously directed. Additionally, the actual Cenobites themselves look awesome. While in previous Hellraiser films where the Cenobites just dress up like your local BDSM artists, these new versions of the creatures have more of a hellish look to them. They look like human beings whose flesh and muscles are so contorted and so fucked up that they look less like humans and more like freaks from hell. Their design was just cool to look at. And I can't mention the Cenobites without the Dirty Dan herself, Pinhead, this time played excellently by Jamie Clayton. Unlike the other actors who replaced Doug Bradley that end up just fucking sucking complete massive donkey dong, Jamie Clayton actually gave a fantastic performance who played the character just as well, if not better, than Doug Bradley. Unlike the other two actors who felt like they were trying to do a shitty imitation of Doug Bradley as Pinhead, Jamie Clayton completely separates herself from the rest of the group by essentially putting her own spin and giving her own interpretation of this character. While Doug Bradley's Pinhead was this booming, authoritarian figure that struck fear into the hearts of the main characters, Jamie Clayton takes a much quieter, more subtle approach to the character. While she still has a creaky voice that strikes fear into the characters, she uses a softer, more gentle approach that slowly builds tension and fear into the hearts of the characters before resulting in an explosive climactic death. It was really awesome to watch. Along with the new version of Pinhead, we are also introduced to new versions of some old classics like Mouth Herpes and Choking Hazard, but we're also shown new Cenobites as well. For example, along with Pinhead, Mouth Herpes, and Choking Hazard, we have Smash Mouth, Sableye, Plastic Surgery, and a new version of Dr. Fuck from Hellraiser 2. But enough about those Cenobites. There are some other strong aspects about the film that I surprisingly loved, one of them being, well, the actual characters. Now, out of all the Hellraiser films, this is the only one I can say that I actually gave a shit about the characters. While not all the characters had the most in-depth backstories, and some of them did kind of exist just to be killed off in a brutal way by the Cenobites, they still acted like reasonable people and made smart enough decisions that you could see yourself making if you were in a movie like this, that I still was concerned about their safety. My favorite scene in this entire film is the scene where one of the characters transitions from being in a van driving away from the Cenobites to a dark hallway before being chained up by Pinhead, having a pin pierce through her throat and then having her fucking spine ripped out of her body. That scene is terrifying, not just because of how brutal the actual kill is, but how scared the character was. Even though I don't remember her name or much about her, I still felt incredibly scared for her because she acted and felt like a real person, and while it might not be much, the fact that this film could get so much emotion out of me from such a brutal and dark kill scene was really impressive to watch. But the best character is easily the main character of Riley. Not only did she give the best performance out of any of the actors in this entire film, except maybe Jamie Clayton and Justin from 13 Reasons Why, obviously, but she is the only character in this entire franchise that I can honestly say has any actual depth. In the film, it is revealed that Riley is a former drug addict trying to break her addiction by attending AA meetings and living with Justin from 13 Reasons Why. And what I found so fascinating about this detail is how the entire movie almost serves as a commentary about drug addiction. Throughout the film, when Riley uses the puzzle box to summon the Cenobites and have the entire plot happen, she is not just putting herself in danger, but others as well, and the Cenobites make it incredibly clear that they do not care who gets stabbed by the box as long as someone gets stabbed and offered up to the Cenobites. Whether they be pieces of shit like the twist villain that Riley fucked, or Justin from 13 Reasons Why, or even their own, no one is safe. Everyone is susceptible to the wrath of Pinhead and her posse, the same way how people who get addicted to meth or heroin or whatever, they're not just hurting themselves, but they're hurting others. It was really brilliant. The film isn't perfect though, as there are some issues holding it back. Like I mentioned before, while I do like the characters, I still wish they got some level of depth and we learned a little bit more about them. And also the film can get a bit too long. It's 2 hours long and I don't think the runtime is entirely justified, but overall this was a really entertaining and exciting horror film that I can't wait to watch again. That's all I'll say for now, so if you want to hear more of my in-depth thoughts about this movie, I highly recommend you listen to my podcast as I go into even more detail about why I love the film. Anyway, this gets a 7 out of 10. Thank you everyone for this journey, I guess. It was fun, but not really. Happy Halloween, and I'll see you all later.